The cold marble of the hospital floor was the last thing I felt. The last sound I heard was his voice, cold and dismissive as I tumbled down the stairs, my body a broken doll. Lian, you're not worthy of me anymore. Leave with nothing. For 10 years, I had been the foundation upon which David Chen built his empire. I worked my fingers to the bone in a textile mill, my dreams and youth sacrificed to put him through 4 years of university. And he rewarded me by becoming the celebrated Professor David Chen, taking his first love, Isabella Wang, into his arms and pushing me down a flight of stairs. The darkness was absolute. Then a jolt. Not of pain but of reality. I blinked and the sterile white of the hospital was gone. Instead, I was standing in the cramped, familiar living room of my mother-in-law's house. The air was thick with the smell of stale tea and cheap cigarettes. And in the center of it all, held aloft like a holy relic, was a crisp, white envelope. A college acceptance letter. For David. Lian, are you deaf? The shrill voice of my mother-in-law, Eleanor, sliced through my disorientation. Her chin was lifted, her expression one of entitled command. Go get your dowry passbook and hand it over. My son needs to pay his tuition. The memory of this moment, seared into my soul from a previous life, flooded back. In my past life, I had obeyed without question, my heart swelling with foolish pride for my husband. I had fetched the passbook, handed over every cent my late parents had left me for protection and sealed my own doom. But not this time. A cold laugh escaped my lips, sharp and unexpected. It cut through the celebratory chatter, silencing the room. Pay your son's tuition? I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Dream on, old lady. This is the startup capital for my business. Eleanor's jaw dropped. The neighbors, Auntie Lu and Mrs. Zhang, gasped in unison. Lian, have you lost your mind? Auntie Lu chimed in, her face a mask of false concern. David is your man. If he makes a name for himself, that brings glory to you too. Isn't that dowry money meant to be spent on this family? She's right, Mrs. Zhang added. A woman should think bigger. Once David becomes an official, you'll have your good days. Quit your job now. Stay home and take care of him. Studying is hard for a man. You need to support him. Their words were a venomous echo, overlapping perfectly with the memories that had led me to ruin. It was these very voices, these honeyed lies of sacrifice and future glory, that had flattered me into handing over my money, my job, and my entire identity. From that day forward in my last life, I had become the Chin family's earning machine and unpaid maid. I drew my gaze from their judgmental faces and fixed it on David. He finally deigned to look at me, peeling his attention away from the praise being showered upon him. His brows furrowed, his handsome face contorted with impatience. Mom's right, Lian, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Don't be difficult. We're family. It's your duty to sacrifice. Once I succeed, you'll get your share of the benefits. The same line. Word for word. My heart, which had already turned to ice the moment he pushed me down the stairs in my last life, didn't so much as twitch. I suddenly laughed, the sound sharp and clear, a discordant note in the room full of empty flattery. Everyone froze. David's face darkened. What are you laughing at? He snapped. Have you finally lost your mind? I'm laughing at all of you, I said, rising slowly from my chair. I brushed imaginary dust from my simple skirt, a gesture of utter dismissal. What dreamers you are. I walked to the table, the centerpiece of their adoration. I picked up the acceptance letter they treated like treasure, feeling the weight of my past suffering in its crisp paper. And with a clean, decisive motion I ripped it in half. The sound was like a gunshot. Why should my money pay for your tuition? Eleanor reacted first, her shriek slicing through the stunned silence. You cursed woman. How dare you? I'll kill you. She lunged at me, claws outstretched. But I had anticipated this. I sidestepped easily and she crashed to the floor with a grunt, her momentum sending her sprawling. David snapped out of his shock, his eyes bloodshot with rage. Lian, are you crazy? He rushed forward, his hand raised to strike me. I had endured countless blows from him in my previous life, cowering each time. But this time I caught his wrist firmly in midair. Years of labor at the textile mill had given me a strength his bookish hands couldn't match. He struggled, but he couldn't break free. I stared at him, my gaze cold and steady. If you dare hit me, I said, each word dripping with chilling clarity. You'd better think about the consequences. Something in my eyes, the fire of a life already lived and lost, the cold certainty of revenge, froze him to the core. His movement halted. The neighbors erupted. She's possessed. She tore up a college acceptance letter. This is the end. The Chin ancestors must be rolling in their graves. Quick, tape it back together. In the midst of the uproar, I flung David's hand away. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried into every ear clear as day. David, we're getting a divorce. The word hung in the air, sucking all the sound from the room. David stammered, standing there in stunned disbelief. Eleanor froze mid-tantrum on the floor, jerking her head up to stare at me as if I'd grown a second head. In the 1980s, divorce was an earth-shattering scandal, enough to make a person unable to hold their head up at work or among neighbors. For David, on the brink of becoming a college student with a bright future ahead, carrying the reputation of abandoning his wife would be devastating. And that was exactly what I wanted. I mean it, I said again, my voice calm but unyielding. I won't go on living like this. I can't serve you and your mother anymore. You dare. David was trembling with fury. Lian, don't you regret this? The only regret I have, I said, looking straight at him with eyes stripped of all warmth, is marrying you. I didn't bother with the chaos erupting around me. I simply turned and walked away. David tried to lunge forward to stop me, but several neighbors, finally useful, caught hold of him. David, calm down, they urged. Talk it over. Quarreling between husband and wife is normal. You fight at the head of the bed but make peace at the foot of it. Don't push things to divorce. On the floor, Eleanor began pounding her thighs, wailing dramatically. Why is my life so bitter? I married such a cursed woman. She's ruined my son's future. I didn't look back. I walked out of the house that had suffocated me for what felt like a lifetime, the sounds of their hysterics fading behind me. The air outside, thick with the humidity of a summer evening, had never felt so fresh, so free. This time I didn't run to my parents' house. In the past, every time I was wronged, I had fled home, only for my well-meaning but traditional parents to urge me to endure it. They were honest, hard-working factory workers who believed a married woman should make her husband's family her sky. If I told them I wanted a divorce, it would only earn me a lecture about perseverance. But this time I was determined to live for myself. I went straight to a shabby guest house, using the few coins in my pocket to rent the cheapest room available. Lying on the lumpy single bed, the springs digging into my back, I forced myself to stay calm and began mapping out my future. First came money. My dowry was a savings account with 300 yuan, my parents' half a lifetime of sweat and toil. In my previous life, that money had gone straight to David's tuition. In this life, it was sewn into the lining of my underclothes, my only guarantee. It would become my first pot of gold. Next was the divorce. It had to happen, and quickly. I couldn't give David or Eleanor time to rally public opinion and bind me with guilt and morality. And then business. The winds of reform and opening up were sweeping across the country in the 1980s. With courage and vision, opportunities glittered everywhere. I carried with me the memories of the decades to come, the knowledge of trends and demands. That was my greatest capital. I would go into the clothing trade. I knew better than anyone what designs, flared pants, batwing sleeves, puff shoulders, would lead the trends in the years ahead. The conservative, formless dresses of the present were a blank canvas waiting for my brush. As I finally drifted into a restless sleep, the image of David's furious, shocked face was the last thing in my mind. But it didn't frighten me. It fueled me. The game had changed. And this time I was writing the rules. The very next morning I went to the bank. The teller, a young man with thick-rimmed glasses, eyed me with surprise as I slid the passbook across the counter and asked to withdraw the entire 300 yuan. It was a small fortune. When he handed me the thick stack of bills, I felt a steadiness I had never known before. This wasn't just money, it was my freedom clutched in my hand. My next stop was the district marriage registration office. The clerk, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a weary expression, looked at me in surprise when I stated my business. "Young lady, you'd better think this through," she said, her voice low. "Divorce isn't a game. It's a serious matter." "I've thought it through," I told her, my voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. "And your husband? Does he agree?" "He doesn't. That's why I came to ask if one side insists on divorce, what's the procedure? She sighed, a sound heavy with the weight of countless broken marriages she had witnessed. There's consensual divorce or litigation. Consensual is fastest, but both parties must agree. Litigation is more troublesome, but if your reasons are solid, the court will grant it. She leaned forward slightly. For example, domestic violence. I thanked her, my mind already calculating. David and Eleanor wouldn't find me at the guest house, so they would undoubtedly swarm my parents' home. I had to get there first to prepare them. Sure enough, as I approached my parents' apartment building, I heard Eleanor's shrill voice, a saw cutting through the quiet afternoon, wailing for sympathy. You must give me justice. Your daughter Leanne has gone too far. She tore up my son's college acceptance letter, and now she wants to divorce him. My parents' door was shut tight, but a crowd of neighbors had already gathered on the landing, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. I drew in a deep breath, pushed through the crowd and stepped inside. Mom, I'm back. The moment my mother saw me, her eyes turned red. She rushed over and clutched my hands, looking me over from head to toe as if checking for broken parts. Leanne, where have you been? You scared me half to death. My father sat on the worn sofa, his face dark as iron, saying nothing. The weight of his silent disappointment was a physical pressure in the room. Eleanor leapt up from the floor the instant she spotted me, pointing a bony finger at my nose. You've got the nerve to come back, you poisonous woman. Hurry up and return with me, apologize to David and hand over your savings book. I'm not going back and you're not getting the money, I said, my voice unnervingly calm as I stared her down. Eleanor, if you dare to make trouble in my house again, I'll report you to the police for harassment. She froze, completely thrown. The meek, obedient daughter-in-law she was used to bullying was gone, replaced by this cold, defiant stranger. My father slammed his hand on the coffee table, the sudden noise making everyone jump. Leanne, what do you think you're doing? Is that any way to speak to your mother-in-law? Dad, I said, my chest tight but my eyes steady. What if I told you that David has hit me? Would you believe me? My father froze, speechless. My mother's face went white with shock. Then what? What did you say? David has hit me more than once. I rolled up my sleeve. On my arm were faint bluish bruises left just days ago when David had shoved me over some trivial irritation. I had endured it silently then, but now those marks were the most damning evidence. He got into college and when he was in a good mood he'd smile at me. When he was in a bad mood he'd take it out on me. Just yesterday he told me outright that it was my duty to sacrifice for him. My voice trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of grievances carried through 2 lifetimes. I looked at my parents, my anchors in this storm. Mom, Dad, I'm your daughter too, not some stray dog you can toss aside at will. I will not stay in this marriage. I must divorce him. My father's lips trembled as he stared at the bruises on my arm. No words came out for a long time. My mother's tears spilled over and she clutched me, sobbing. My foolish child, why didn't you tell us you were suffering like this? Eleanor's eyes darted around and she immediately snapped back with venom. Lies. You probably bumped yourself and now you're framing my son. What a wicked heart you have. Lies or not? I replied coldly. We can have a doctor examine me. Or better yet, we'll go straight to court and let the judge decide. At the mention of court, Eleanor's bluster collapsed. Fear flickered across her face. She was terrified of a scandal ruining David's future. Just then the man himself arrived. David walked in and seeing my parents present he immediately put on an expression of deep anguish. Leanne, how could you slander me like this? We're husband and wife. When have I ever so much as laid a finger on you? He stepped forward, reaching for my hand with feigned tenderness. I pulled away as if burned. Leanne, I know you're upset about the tuition, he said, his voice dripping with a sincerity that made my stomach turn. Please trust me. We're working on the money. Just come home with me, okay? Don't make Mom and Dad worry. He was such an actor, dismissing my resistance as a petty tantrum, making himself look righteous while washing his hands clean of any blame. Sure enough, my parents began to waver. My father sighed. Leanne, David came here to take you home. Why don't you? Don't let this. Don't let him fool you, I cut him off sharply. He doesn't care about me. He's afraid I'll take him to court. He's afraid he won't get into college. At my words, David's mask finally cracked. Lien, he growled low, a predator's warning in his voice. Do you really have to push things this far? You're the one who pushed it first. I met his glare without flinching. I'll give you two choices, David. First, we sign a divorce agreement. You leave with nothing and we part ways cleanly. Second, I file a lawsuit for domestic violence and let everyone in town, the entire district, and even your university see you for what you really are. His eyes burned with pure, unadulterated hatred as he stared at me. The neighbors outside were silent, eavesdropping on every word. At length he forced the words out through clenched teeth. Lien, you're ruthless. Thanks for the compliment, I said flatly. In the end, under my unyielding insistence and the threat of public scandal, David gave in. 3 days later we stood in the same marriage registration office. The kind-eyed clerk processed our papers with a somber expression. We finalized the divorce. The house belonged to his family and I didn't take anything. Not furniture, not belongings. I only carried a small bag with a few clothes of my own and that precious 300 yuan, now significantly diminished but still potent. The moment I stepped out of the building, sunlight spilled over me, warm and forgiving. I felt as though I had shed a heavy, filthy skin. I was reborn. Behind me, Eleanor hurled curses, swearing I would end up destitute and regret it all. I didn't waste a single glance on her. My eyes were fixed on the road ahead, a clear and open path that was mine and mine alone to walk. With the divorce papers feeling like a shield in my bag, I moved quickly. My first destination was the busiest commercial street in the county. After days of searching, I found it. A tiny, dusty storefront tucked between a hardware store and a noodle shop. Its for rent sign was faded, but its location was perfect, right in the flow of human traffic. The rent was steep, swallowing nearly 100 yuan of my remaining capital, but I knew location was everything. I signed the lease with a steady hand, my signature on the paper a declaration of war on my past life. I named my little shop, A New Chapter. It was simple, but to me it was perfect. I didn't stock ready-made clothes. The drab, uniform styles available were part of the world I was leaving behind. Instead, I invested my remaining money in a second-hand sewing machine that wheezed and clattered but worked, and a large stack of fabrics in colors and patterns that were bold for the time, deep emeralds, vibrant crimsons, and prints with large artistic florals. My plan was to design and make everything myself, creating unique pieces that no one else had. In the quiet of my rented room, by the light of a single bare bulb, I sketched. Flared pants that would swish with movement, batwing tops that disguised flaws and offered dramatic silhouette, dresses with subtle puff shoulders that emphasized feminine strength. In the decades to come they would be common, but in this era they were nothing short of revolutionary. I worked day and night at the squeaking sewing machine, my fingers becoming raw and pricked by needles. I ate a plain steamed bun when I was hungry, napped with my head on the cutting table when exhaustion overwhelmed me. The physical toll was immense, but it was nothing compared to the soul-crushing labor of my previous existence. This was my dream, my sweat. Every stitch was a step away from David Chin. After a week of frantic work, my first batch of 10 garments hung in the shop, pressed and pristine. On opening day there were no firecrackers or flower baskets. But the moment those bright, stylish clothes went on display in the freshly cleaned window, they acted like a magnet. People crowded at the doorway, pointing and whispering. These clothes are gorgeous but a little too fashionable. Look at these pant legs. Huge like a broom. The fabric's nice but the price is high. Who does she think she is? All morning long many asked questions, their eyes wide with a mixture of desire and fear, but no one bought. I wasn't worried. I knew they just needed someone to take the lead, to show them it was okay to stand out. So I slipped into the boldest outfit in the shop. A vivid red batwing top paired with sleek black flared pants that showed off my tall, work-hardened figure to perfection. Standing at the door, I became my own living advertisement, a walking testament to the confidence my clothes could offer. Sure enough, that afternoon, a young woman lingered outside for a long time. She was dressed well, her hair styled in a modern cut. She finally stepped in, her eyes fixed on my outfit. "Boss," she said, her voice curious and direct. "Can I try on the outfit you're wearing?" I knew then my first real sale was coming. Her name was Sophia Lin, the daughter of a county official. She had a progressive mind and, as she later told me, always thought the local clothes were dowdy and uninspired. When she stepped out of the makeshift fitting room, her eyes sparkled. She twirled in front of the mirror, the flared pants catching the air. "It's stunning," she breathed. "Boss, where did you get this design? I haven't seen anything this chic even in the provincial capital." "I made it myself," I replied with a genuine smile. "There's only one like it in the whole county." "I'll take it," Sophia said without a moment's hesitation, handing over the money. That first sale was more than a transaction. It was a validation. And as I had hoped, once the first brave customer had taken the plunge, the rest followed. Sophia, brimming with confidence, wore my design to a party that evening and immediately became the center of attention. The very next day she brought a flock of her girlfriends, all chattering and eager, into my shop. Overnight, a new chapter became a sensation. My designs became synonymous with style and taste, and orders poured in faster than I could manage on my own. I remembered the women from my previous life who had been laid off from the textile factory when business went bad. They were all highly skilled with a needle and thread, just lacking in opportunity. I put up a simple help wanted notice in the shop window and soon interviewed 5 talented seamstresses, their eyes lighting up at the chance to work on such beautiful modern clothing. I converted the small storage room behind the shop into a bustling workshop, the rhythmic sound of multiple sewing machines a symphony of progress. I taught them my designs, my methods, and they executed them with a skill that surpassed my own. Business boomed. Money flowed into my cash box like water. In just 3 short months, I became the first person in the county to earn over 10,000 yuan, a figure that was whispered about with a mixture of awe and envy. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, David's days were far from easy. Without my 300 yuan, Eleanor had been forced to go door to door, her pride in tatters, begging for loans. But no one's money fell from the sky. Even after wearing out her tongue, she only managed to scrape together a little over 100 yuan, still not enough for the full tuition. Without my financial support, David's life at university was miserably tight. While I commanded attention and influence in the county, he sat in the university cafeteria, gnawing on the cheapest steamed buns, watching his better-off classmates dress in fine clothes. The crushing contrast festered inside him, and I knew without a doubt that his resentment toward me was growing wild and unchecked, like poisonous weeds in a neglected garden. My success was my revenge, and it was sweeter than I had ever imagined. The bell above the door of a new chapter chimed, a sound that usually brought a smile to my face. But on this day it heralded an intrusion. I was at the counter balancing the ledgers, the numbers a testament to my hard-won independence, when he walked in. David. He wore clothes so faded they were nearly white, his face sallow and pinched with poverty. His eyes, shadowed with gloom and tinged with bloodshot resentment, scanned the bright, stylish atmosphere of my store as if it were an alien planet. He was completely out of place, a ghost from a past I had worked diligently to bury. One of my clerks, a bright young woman named May, moved to intercept him, but I gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of my head. I wanted to hear what he had to say. He walked right up to the counter, his gaze fixed not on me but on the rows of numbers in my ledger. His eyes turned a deeper shade of red. "Lien," he said, his voice dripping with a bitterness so potent it soured the air. "You're living well, aren't you?" "Thanks to you," I replied coolly, not even looking up from my books. "Not bad." "You planned this all along, didn't you?" he accused, his voice a low growl. "Divorcing me while lining up your escape route." At that I finally raised my eyes. The man before me was a shell of the arrogant scholar I had once known. Poverty and envy had carved new, unpleasant lines into his face. "David," I said, my voice flat, "do you really think the whole world should revolve around you? Did you expect me to break down, cry my eyes out, and starve once I left you?" My words caught in his throat, leaving him speechless for a moment. The truth, it seemed, was an inconvenient thing. At last he forced out his real purpose, his tone stiff and entitled as though I owed him the favor. "I came today to borrow some money." I laughed, a short, humorless sound. "And why would I give you money?" "Because we were husband and wife once," he said, his shameless confidence breathtaking. "You're rich now. What's the harm in helping me a little?" "We're divorced," I reminded him, my voice like ice. "And I have no obligation to help an ex-husband, especially not one who beat his wife and cared for nothing but himself." With every word I said, his face darkened further, the mask of civility crumbling to reveal the ugliness beneath. Lien, don't push me too far. His voice dropped to a menacing whisper, his eyes flashing with a danger I recognized from my past life. You're just a woman running a business this big. Aren't you afraid something might happen? So it had come to threats. I sneered inwardly but kept my face a calm, impassive mask. Oh. Like what exactly? Just then a clear, authoritative male voice cut through the tension from the doorway. Like I could make sure he's the one something happens to first. I looked up and my breath caught. A man in a crisp green military uniform stood there, tall and commanding. His features were sharp and striking, his posture ramrod straight. On his shoulder gleamed the insignia of a captain. It was Alex Gua, a neighbor from my past life who I knew would later rise to prominence as a high-ranking officer. In my previous existence, we'd never exchanged more than a polite nod. I only ever glimpsed him from afar in the military compound, a stern, unsmiling figure in his perfectly pressed uniform. Our lives had been parallel lines, destined never to cross. So why was he here now, stepping in to shield me? David saw the insignia on Alex's shoulder and his bravado crumbled, though he tried to bluff. Who are you? This is between us. It's family business. Stay out of it. Family business? Alex stepped closer until he was at my side, a solid, reassuring presence. His gaze swept over David, cold and assessing. She's divorced you. Threatening her here isn't family business, it's harassment. Do I need to call the police station and let them decide? David's face flushed an ugly shade of purple. He was just a poor student, and in front of a military officer of Alex Gua's obvious standing, his bluster shrank to nothing. No one in their right mind would dare challenge such authority. I was just joking with her, David stammered, his eyes darting towards the door. Joking? Alex's sharp eyes narrowed. My soldiers bleed and die on the battlefield to protect the lives and property of the people, and you stand here threatening a law-abiding businesswoman, then call it a joke? His authority was overwhelming. With just a few words he had David breaking out in a cold sweat, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I've got something else to do. I'll leave now. Throwing that out, David turned tail and fled, utterly humiliated. The shop quieted down. The other customers who had been watching with wide eyes, slowly returned to their browsing, casting curious glances our way. I studied the handsome man before me, my heart still beating a little too fast. Thank you, Captain Gua, I said, my voice softer than I intended. But why did you come here? Alex let go of his sharp, commanding aura, his gaze softening when it fell on me. My younger sister's birthday is coming up. I wanted to buy her something nice. People told me this shop has the most beautiful clothes in the county. I suddenly remembered he did have a younger sister, a cheerful girl named Lily. Please take a look around, I offered, my business owner persona returning. Pick whatever you like. I'll give you a discount. But he shook his head, his dark eyes steady on mine. No need for a discount. I came here to buy clothes. Then his voice softened further. I didn't scare you just now, did he? No, I said with a small, genuine smile. But thank you really. It was nothing to you, but it meant a lot to me. He paused, then added, his tone earnest. Stay away from people like him, Lien. If you run into trouble, you can always come to the compound and find me. His words sent a flicker of warmth through my chest, a sensation so foreign and comforting it nearly brought tears to my eyes. Across 2 lifetimes aside from my parents, this was the first time someone had sincerely offered to protect me. I will. Thank you, Captain Gua. Alex, he corrected gently. Alex, I repeated, the name feeling strange yet familiar on my tongue. He didn't say more, just gave a small, formal nod before turning and leaving. I watched his tall, upright figure retreat, feeling something stir in my heart that I couldn't quite name, a fragile, hopeful thing I thought had died in me long ago. After he left, I immediately acted on the warning his presence had underscored. I hired 2 retired soldiers as security guards for the shop. David's threats had been a stark reminder. The bigger the business, the more jealousy it drew. My safety and the safety of my dream had to be guarded. My empire was expanding, and soon I was no longer content with just one shop in the county. My eyes turned to the provincial capital. With the money I'd earned, I rented a prime storefront in the busiest commercial center there. Renovations, hiring, and training all progressed in an orderly way, the blueprint of my success being replicated on a grander scale. But just as my branch store in the capital was about to open, someone else unexpected came looking for me. A woman whose face was etched into my memory as the catalyst of my first downfall. Isabella Wong. David's so-called first love from my past life. The woman who had once clung to his arm, mocking me as old and worn out after he had made his name. But why was she here? Shouldn't she still be in college with him? The Isabella standing before me now was nothing like the meticulously made-up haughty woman in my memory. She wore a simple, almost shabby dress, her face free of makeup, her expression timid and cautious. "Hello, Lien," she said quickly, her voice barely a whisper. I leaned back in my chair in the back office of my new store, coolly observing her. "What do you want?" "I'm David's classmate," she stammered, biting her lip. "I heard you opened clothing shops and that they're doing really well, so I was wondering if I could work here. Please, my family isn't well off. I need to earn my tuition and living expenses. I can do anything and I'm not afraid of hard work." I almost laughed out loud. The bitter irony was almost too much to bear. The very woman who in my last life became Professor Chen's wife and helped drive me out with nothing now stood before me, asking for a job for my mercy. I stared at her pitiful face, but inside I was cold. Nothing this unusual happened without a reason. She was David's classmate. How could she not know the bitter feud between us? Was she truly down and desperate? Or was she a pawn David had planted at my side? My first instinct was to throw her out. But a colder, more calculating thought prevailed. I wanted to see exactly what kind of play she and David were planning to stage right in front of me. "I'm not hiring," I said flatly, testing her. "Lien, please." She rushed a step closer, her eyes welling with tears that seemed a little too perfectly timed. "I'm begging you. Give me a chance. I don't even need a salary, just food and a place to stay." "No salary?" That settled it. Something was definitely off. My fingers tapped lightly against the desk as I changed my mind. I gave her a faint, calculated smile. "All right, since you're so sincere, I'll give you a chance. You can start work tomorrow." I wanted the snake where I could see it. And I was no longer the naive woman who would be charmed by a pretty, pitiful face. I was the hunter now, and Isabella Wong had just walked into my trap. Isabella started work the next day at the new provincial branch. I arranged for her to be an ordinary clerk, nothing more. And her performance was, to my immense suspicion, impeccable. She was always the first to arrive, sweeping the floors before anyone else was even awake. She was the last to leave, meticulously organizing the shelves and tidying the fitting rooms. She greeted customers with a sweet, unassuming smile, knew how to read their moods, and soon won the affection of the other staff with her seemingly genuine humility and hard work. She never once pried into my personal matters or the store's confidential business. She was the perfect picture of a poor, struggling student, diligent and obedient. If not for the searing memories of my past life, I might have been fooled by this act. But I knew her. I knew the ambition that lay beneath that demure exterior. The more flawless her mask, the bigger her hidden agenda had to be. I didn't expose her. I simply watched, a silent predator from the shadows, waiting for her to make a move. The provincial branch opened to a frenzy. With its fresh designs and the reputation I had built in the county, a new chapter became an overnight sensation in the capital. Business was even hotter than at my first shop. I was constantly traveling between the two locations, the pace exhausting but exhilarating. During one of my brief returns to the county shop, my phone rang, a new and expensive addition to my office. The voice on the other end was frantic, cracked with sobs. "Lien? It's Lily. Lily Gua." My heart immediately clenched. "Lily? What's wrong? Calm down, tell me slowly." "My brother. Alex, he's in trouble. He was injured during a mission. His leg. He got hurt saving someone. He's in the military hospital now." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Alex." The stern captain who had stood up for me without a second thought. Without hesitation, I gave instructions to my manager, closed the shop and drove straight to the military hospital, my mind a whirlwind of fear and concern. Inside the ward, Alex lay on the bed, one leg encased in thick plaster and suspended high. His face was pale, drained of its usual vigor, but his expression was as firm and unyielding as ever. He looked surprised and perhaps a little embarrassed when he saw me. Lian, why are you here? Lily called me, I said, walking to his bedside. My chest tightened as I glanced at the suspended leg. Is it serious? Just a fracture, he answered lightly, waving a dismissive hand. A minor injury. I'll be fine after a few months of rest. But Lily, standing by the window, had tears in her eyes. The doctor said it damaged the tendons and bones, she whispered, contradicting him. It could leave lasting effects. It might keep him from going back to the army. My heart sank. For a soldier like Alex, a man born for duty and command, nothing could be more devastating than being permanently grounded. Don't listen to her, Alex frowned, though I saw the flicker of fear in his own eyes. There are plenty in the army who've been hurt worse than me. I'm not that fragile. During his hospital stay, I visited every chance I got. I brought him homemade bone broth, kept him company during the long, boring hours, and shared amusing stories from the shops. He was mostly a quiet listener, but little by little, the weariness and frustration on his face would fade when I was there. Without realizing it, a deep, unspoken bond was forming between us, forged in the quiet moments of his convalescence. One day, as usual, I walked into the ward carrying my thermos. But the sight that greeted me stopped me cold, a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's sterile air. Sitting by Alex's bed, speaking to him in a soft, gentle voice, was Isabella Wong. She was wearing a spotless white dress as pure as freshly fallen snow, her long hair hanging loose over her shoulders. She was diligently trying to peel an apple for him, but Alex was frowning, his body language stiff with distance and clear discomfort. When she saw me enter, her smile froze for a fraction of a second before she quickly smoothed it over. Lian, you're here, she said, her voice a little too bright. I stood in the doorway, my knuckles white around the handle of the thermos, staring at the strange, unsettling scene. What was she doing here? How did she even know he was here? Captain Guo, don't you recognize me? Isabella was saying, turning her saccharine smile back to Alex. My name is Isabella. I work at Lian's shop. We met the last time you came by. Alex thought for a moment, his brow furrowed. I'm sorry, I don't recall. Isabella didn't seem embarrassed. She continued smoothly. I heard from the girls at the shop that you were hurt and in the hospital, so I thought I'd come on behalf of everyone to see you. You're our big hero after all. Her words were flawless, explaining her presence while flattering him at the same time. It was a masterful performance. I set the thermos down on the bedside table with a sharp, deliberate thunk. And how did you know he was in this hospital? I asked, staring straight at her, my voice dangerously calm. In this exact room? Isabella's eyes flickered. I asked his sister Lily. Really? I turned toward Lily, who had just walked in carrying a kettle of water. Lily looked completely bewildered. No, you didn't. I don't even know who you are. The lie crumbled into dust at our feet. Isabella's face went pale as paper. The air in the ward grew heavy and thick with unease. Alex, sharp as the soldier he was, immediately sensed the deception. His gaze hardened into flint as he fixed it on Isabella. Who are you really? He demanded, his voice low and commanding. And what is your purpose for being here? Isabella stammered, her eyes instantly brimming with manufactured tears. Her name is Isabella Wong, I cut in coldly. She's David Chen's classmate. And his girlfriend. I deliberately put weight on the last word. Both Alex and Lily froze in shock. Isabella's face went even whiter, as though all the blood had drained away. She had never expected me to expose her so bluntly, so publicly. No, that's not true, she blurted out, her voice cracking. I have nothing to do with him. Nothing? I sneered, taking a step closer. Nothing, yet he keeps your photo tucked in his textbooks? Nothing, yet you sneak into my shop as his mole? I didn't, she cried, the tears now flowing freely, her pitiful act in full force. Lian, why are you slandering me like this? I only admire Captain Guo, that's all. I just wanted to visit him. She then turned her weeping eyes to me, a masterstroke of manipulation. Or is it because you still have feelings for David? So when you see me, you assume I'm here to steal a man from you? What nonsense. Lily snapped, stepping forward. Though kind-hearted, she wasn't stupid and she trusted me implicitly. Lian isn't like that. She nearly blurted out sister-in-law before catching herself, her cheeks flushing bright red as she shot Isabella a venomous glare. Alex, meanwhile, had never taken his eyes off Isabella, his expression cold enough to freeze fire. "My ward number is classified military information," he stated, each word a hammer blow. "Where did you get it?" Isabella flinched violently under his soldier's stare, her act completely falling apart. "I heard it. From David," she finally whispered, defeated. He said you and Leanne were close and he wanted me to see if you two were together. He said if you really were with her, he'd give up on her completely. I was only trying to help him. I didn't mean any harm." On the surface, her words seemed to expose David. But in reality, they were a clever poison, suggesting David still couldn't let me go while painting herself as a mere foolish messenger. At the same time, she had skillfully shifted the spotlight onto the undefined relationship between Alex and me, trying to sow suspicion and doubt. "Bring him here," Alex said suddenly, his voice like ice. Isabella froze. "Bring who?" "David Chin," Alex replied, his eyes holding not a shred of pity. "I want to confront him face to face. I want to ask how an ordinary college student found out about my hospitalization, and who gave him the nerve to send someone to pry into a soldier's private life." Isabella panicked completely. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected the situation to escalate to this level. Spying on a soldier's privacy was no small matter. If that accusation stuck, David's future would be finished. He wouldn't just fail to graduate, he might face expulsion or worse. "No, please don't," she cried in desperation. "This has nothing to do with David. It was all my idea. Please don't make trouble for him." The more she defended him, the clearer their connection became. I stood by, cold and silent, a spectator to the unraveling of their pathetic scheme. I had seen enough. The serpent had shown its fangs, and now it was time to cut off its head. Alex would not be swayed. He ignored Isabella's frantic pleading and, with a firm nod to Lily, had her summon the university security office from the nurses' station. The authority in his voice brooked no argument. This was no longer a petty domestic squabble. It was a matter of military security. Within half an hour, the ward door opened again to reveal two stern-faced campus guards escorting a pale and trembling David. The moment he walked in and saw the scene, Alex's cold fury, my impassive stare, Isabella's tear-streaked face, his legs nearly gave out. The confidence he'd displayed in my shop was gone, replaced by the cowering weakness of a cornered rat. Especially when his eyes met Alex's unyielding stare, he began to stammer helplessly. "See, Captain Gui, I can explain." "Explain then," Alex said, his voice deceptively calm, but carrying an authority that vibrated through the room. "Tell me, how did you find out about my hospitalization?" Cold sweat broke out instantly across David's forehead. He glanced toward Isabella, his eyes silently begging for help, for a story, for anything. She bit her lip, shaking her head frantically, her own future crumbling before her. I heard it from someone," David mumbled, his eyes darting around, unable to meet Alex's gaze. "From who?" Alex pressed, relentless. I don't remember." "Really?" Alex gave a short, chilling laugh. "Then it seems your memory isn't very good. No problem. We have ways to help jog it. Or we could take this somewhere else and have a nice, long talk with the Public Security Bureau." At the mention of the Public Security Bureau, David's defenses crumbled completely. The threat of real, legal consequences was a language he understood. He all but fell to his knees before Alex's bed. I'll talk, he blurted out, his voice cracking with fear. He jabbed a shaking finger at Isabella. "It was her. He told me. She said she had a relative working at the military hospital who could find out about you. She's the one who pushed me to check on you and Liane. She said if I could expose something between you, Liane would be shamed, her reputation ruined, and she'd have no choice but to come back to me. Then all her money would be mine. Captain Gua, it was all her idea. I was just blinded for a moment." In order to save himself, he sold out Isabella without a moment's hesitation. The depth of his cowardice was breathtaking. Isabella stared at him in utter disbelief, as though seeing him for the first time. This was the talented, ambitious man she had admired, the one she believed was destined for greatness. She had thrown away her pride to come work for me, all for his sake. And now, at the first sign of real trouble, he was throwing her to the wolves. "David, you liar," she screamed, her voice raw with betrayal. Liar. David shouted back, his face twisted with a venomous rage now that the facade was gone. If it weren't for you whispering in my ear day after day, telling me how rich Lien was, telling me that if I could win her back I'd rise to the top overnight, do you think I'd have thought of this on my own? Isabella, don't pretend your conscience is clean. The ward erupted into a chaotic spectacle, a perfect, pathetic display of dog-eat-dog. They hurled accusations back and forth, their shared resentment and selfishness laid bare for all to see. I folded my arms, watching with a sense of grim satisfaction. This was the true face of the people who had destroyed me in another life. They were small, petty, and ultimately their own worst enemies. Alex watched the display with cold disdain until he'd had enough. Enough, he commanded, and the room fell silent. He looked at the guards. Please escort them out. I will be filing an official report with the university and the relevant authorities. Malicious intrusion into a soldier's privacy and attempted extortion are serious matters. Both David and Isabella were led away, their futures shrouded in a heavy, dark shadow. Expulsion was now the least of their worries. David's dream of becoming a professor hadn't even begun, yet it was already crumbling into dust. In the quiet that followed, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The immediate threat was over. A month later, Alex was discharged from the hospital. His leg had healed well, and the doctors were optimistic that with dedicated rehabilitation he would be able to return to his unit. The day he was released, I went to pick him up. He had changed into simple civilian clothes, a plain white shirt and dark trousers, which softened the sharp edges of his military bearing. He looked younger, more approachable, like the boy next door rather than the formidable captain. Lien, he said solemnly as we stood outside the hospital doors, the sun warm on our faces. Thank you. For everything. Friends don't need to be so polite, I answered, smiling up at him. He looked down at me, his dark eyes serious. Not just friends, he said, his voice low. For a moment, it felt like starlight flickered in their depths. Lien, But before he could finish, the moment was shattered. A doctor in a white coat came running toward us, his face ashen, gasping for air. Captain Gua. Something's wrong. Your sister's been kidnapped. The world stopped. The color drained from Alex's face and I felt my own blood run cold. What happened? Alex seized the doctor's arm, his grip so strong it nearly crushed bone. I don't know all the details, the doctor stammered, terrified. The kidnappers called the hospital directly. They said your sister is in their hands and they want you to take 100,000 yuan to the abandoned factory in the west of the city. Alone. No police. If anyone follows or you report it, they'll kill her. 100,000 yuan. In 1986, it was a fortune beyond imagination, a king's ransom. The target was obvious. It wasn't just Alex they were after. It was his connection to me, the county's first 10,000 yuan household. My success had painted a target on his back, on sweet, innocent Lily's back. Alex's fists clenched so hard his knuckles cracked, a fury like I had never seen blazing in his eyes. He was a soldier, a protector, and someone had dared to touch his family. Calm down, I said, grabbing his hand. My own was cold, but I willed it to be steady. Now's not the time for anger. Right now, Lily's safety matters most. My touch seemed to ground him. He drew in a deep, shuddering breath, then turned to me, his expression tortured. Lien, stay out of this. I'll handle it myself. How could I not be involved? I insisted, my voice firm. Lily was dragged into this because of me, because of my money. I'll put up the ransom. We can get the money. This isn't about money, he said, his voice fierce with protective fear. They're desperate criminals. It's far too dangerous for you to be involved. We argued, a frantic, hushed debate on the hospital steps, neither of us backing down out of concern for the other. Finally, we reached a tense compromise. We would call the police, but we would use his military connections to ensure it was handled with the utmost discretion and force. Alex contacted senior officers at the Public Security Bureau. The case was taken with the highest priority. A special task force formed immediately. But the kidnappers were cunning. Their demand for Alex to come alone, forbidding any communication devices, meant the police couldn't monitor or track him in real time. The only option was a perilous plan. Alex would pretend to comply, carrying a bag with fake money, while the police set up a silent, wide perimeter around the factory, ready to storm in once the kidnappers showed themselves. He was to be the bait. No, I was the first to object, my heart in my throat. It's too dangerous. What if? There are no what ifs, he cut me off, his eyes unwavering, the soldier taking over. I am a soldier. Protecting the people is my duty. And this time it's my sister. My throat tightened, all my arguments dying before the absolute conviction in his gaze. I knew I couldn't change his mind. Before he left to prepare, he pressed a small, sealed envelope into my hand. Lien. His voice was low and gentle, his eyes locked on mine with an intensity that stole my breath. If I don't come back, give this to my parents. The thin envelope felt heavier than a slab of gold, a terrible weight in my palm. I clutched it tightly, my fingers trembling as I watched him walk away, his figure straight and proud, heading straight into the heart of danger. Every minute that passed was its own form of torture. In the makeshift command center set up in a van several blocks away, I stared at the silent monitors with the stone-faced officers, the screens showing only the desolate, silent perimeter of the abandoned factory. Inside there was nothing. No sound, no movement. My thoughts spun wildly. His leg. Was it strong enough? How many kidnappers were there? Were they armed? Was Lily hurt? Just as the panic threatened to consume me, a sharp, unmistakable crack echoed through the radio. A gunshot. I shot to my feet, my heart slamming against my ribs like a wild bird. Every officer in the van jolted, their expressions turning to granite. Action! The commander barked. Sirens wailed to life, screaming through the quiet city as police cars roared toward the factory from every direction. I didn't think. I bolted from the command center, jumped into my car and sped after them, a silent prayer screaming in my mind. Alex Guy, you must be safe. You must. I arrived at the abandoned factory to a scene of controlled chaos. The area was already cordoned off by police, their figures moving with swift, practiced efficiency. I was stopped behind the barricade, my hands gripping the cold metal, my knuckles white. I could only watch from afar, my heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. Soon the main doors of the factory swung open. 2 officers dragged a man out in handcuffs. Even from a distance, even with his head bowed, I would know that silhouette anywhere. It was a shape etched into the darkest parts of my memory. It was David. My brain went blank, unable to process the sight. Him. He was the kidnapper. The mastermind behind this. The sheer, stupid audacity of it was staggering. His envy, his bitterness had curdled into this. A violent, desperate crime. Moments later, another figure emerged from the factory. Alex. He was striding out, but he was carrying someone in his arms, a limp form drenched in blood. His own arm bore a deep, horrifying knife wound, the white of bone nearly visible, his sleeve soaked a deep, alarming crimson. But the person he carried wasn't Lily. It was Isabella Wong. She had been shot in the chest, her white dress now a grotesque canvas of red. She was unconscious, her face a ghostly pale on the brink of death. From another corner of the factory, a team of police escorted Lily out. She was wrapped in a blanket, her face streaked with tears and grime, terrified but mercifully physically unharmed. Ambulances screamed onto the scene, their lights painting the grim tableau in flashes of red and blue. Paramedics rushed to transfer Isabella onto a stretcher, working on her frantically as they loaded her into one ambulance. Another team descended on Alex, trying to staunch the flow of blood from his arm as he stubbornly refused to let go of Lily, holding her close with his good arm. I stood frozen amid the chaos, the world moving in a blur around me as if trapped in some twisted, surreal nightmare. David was the kidnapper. Isabella had taken a bullet. None of it made any sense. The pieces only fell into place later, in the cold, hard light of the police interrogation and Lily's tearful account. The kidnapper was indeed David. After he and Isabella had been punished by the university, both receiving severe demerits and living under the constant threat of expulsion, their resentment had festered and deepened, especially David's. He had become utterly consumed by the belief that every tragedy in his life was my fault, and by extension Alex's for protecting me. Blinded by hatred, he had chosen the path of kidnapping and extortion, determined to ruin us both financially and emotionally. But Isabella's role was more complicated. After David's betrayal at the hospital, her feelings for him had turned to ash. Yet she was still bound to him by their shared disgrace. She had discovered his insane plan, overheard his ransom call. A strange, convoluted sense of guilt, or perhaps a final desperate grab for a different kind of redemption, had taken hold of her. She had anonymously tipped off the police, then in a move of breathtaking foolishness, had slipped into the factory alone, hoping to reason with David or perhaps to rescue Lily herself and be the hero. David had discovered her. In the ensuing struggle, he had lost control, his finger tightening on the trigger of the stolen gun aimed at a terrified Lily. In that split second, Isabella had thrown herself in the path of the bullet, shielding Lily from a fatal shot. That was the moment Alex, who had been moving silently through the factory, had burst in and overpowered David in a violent, desperate struggle that left his arms slashed to the bone. Hearing it all left me in a heavy, conflicted silence. I had never imagined events would take such a dark and twisted turn. Isabella, the woman I had always thought of as vain and venomous, had saved my friend's life, and the life of the man I had come to care for so deeply at the potential cost of her own. She had become a vegetable. The doctors managed to remove the bullet, but the damage to her heart and surrounding nerves was too severe. "She's temporarily out of danger," the lead surgeon told us, his face grim. But the bullet was too close to her heart. "The damage is severe. Whether she wakes up depends entirely on her will now." David, charged with kidnapping, attempted murder, and a host of other crimes, was swiftly sentenced to life in prison. At just over 20 years old, his bright future was not just dimmed. It was extinguished, replaced by the endless gray of a prison cell. His mother, Eleanor, couldn't bear the final, crushing blow. The shame and grief shattered her mind, and she was committed to a mental asylum, her wails echoing in a different kind of cage. A once fiery entanglement, one that had defined and destroyed my first life, had ended in the most devastating way imaginable. I visited Isabella a few times in the long-term care facility. She lay motionless in the sterile white bed, a breathing doll connected to a symphony of whirring and beeping machines. I didn't know what had been in her heart when she stepped into that factory. Was it atonement for her role in my past suffering? Was it a twisted admiration for Alex's strength, a desire to prove herself worthy in his eyes? Or was it simply the final dramatic act of a woman who had always defined herself through the men in her life? Perhaps even she hadn't known. I paid all her medical expenses and hired the best private caretakers money could find. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly. It was a complicated acknowledgement of a debt I never wanted to owe. It was the only thing I could do for her. Alex's arm healed well, the surgeons assuring him that with time and therapy, it would leave no lasting damage to his military career. The ordeal had been a trial by fire for both of us, and having gone through that life and death terror together, the thin, unspoken veil between us finally tore apart. The night before he was set to return to his unit for light duties, he asked me to walk with him by the lake in the military compound. The evening breeze was gentle, carrying the scent of blooming magnolias. The moon was bright and clear, its reflection shimmering on the dark water. "Lien," he suddenly stopped, his voice steady but tinged with a vulnerability I had never heard before. He turned to me, the moonlight etching the strong lines of his face. "Did you read that letter?" I froze for a moment before realizing he meant the one he'd given me before walking into the factory, the one that had felt like a last will and testament. I shook my head, a lump in my throat. I never dared to. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out another identical envelope. "It's all right," he said, a small nervous smile touching his lips. "I'll give you another." He pressed it into my hand, his fingers warm against my skin, his eyes burning with an intensity that made my breath catch. "This time you must read it." Lowering my head, my heart hammering, I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was no long flowery speech. Just a single simple line written in bold, steady strokes. A perfect reflection of the man himself. "I love you. If I come back, will you marry me?" Tears, hot and unreserved, spilled from my eyes, tracing paths down my cheeks. I looked up at him, saw the nervous anticipation and the deep, unwavering affection in his gaze, and smiled through my tears, nodding firmly. "I will." Our marriage was met with blessings from both our families. After witnessing the sheer ugliness of the Chin family and the stark contrast of Alex's integrity and strength, My parents no longer questioned my divorce. Their initial disappointment had long since transformed into fierce pride for my accomplishments, and now, all they wanted was for me to live the rest of my life in happiness. Alex's parents, seasoned revolutionaries with hearts as broad as their experiences, were wonderfully open-minded. They didn't care a whit about my past as a divorcee. They valued character and ability above all else, and when they learned how I had built a business empire from nothing, they praised me endlessly, welcoming me into their family with open arms. Our wedding was simple by some standards, but to me it was profoundly grand. There was no extravagant, wasteful display, but every notable figure in the military compound attended, their respect for Alex evident in their firm handshakes and warm smiles. That day I wore a wedding dress I had designed and sewn with my own hands. An elegant, modern gown that was both sophisticated and uniquely me. I walked down the aisle on Alex's good arm, his injured one held proudly in a sling, and received the genuine blessings of everyone around us. I saw my parents in the front row, their eyes brimming with tears of relief and joy. I saw Alex's parents smiling so widely their faces could barely contain their happiness. I saw Lily, now fully recovered, more excited than I was, bouncing on her heels. And I saw my employees, my friends, the people who had become my new family. In that moment, holding Alex's hand, I felt like the happiest, most complete person alive. All the suffering and humiliation of my past life, the memory of that cold hospital floor, seemed to vanish like smoke, dispersed by the warmth of the love surrounding me. This time I had not only erased my regrets, I had gained everything: love, success, and a family built on respect. After marriage, Alex cherished me like a treasure. He wasn't a man of many words, but he expressed his love in every action, every quiet gesture. When work kept me late at the shop, he would show up to walk me home, a silent, solid presence in the darkening streets. When I was hunched over my drafting table, sketching designs deep into the night, he would quietly drape a coat over my shoulders and set down a cup of warm milk beside me, his hand resting on my back for a brief, comforting moment. He remembered every one of my likes and dislikes, from my favorite foods to the way I took my tea. We became the model couple in the military compound, a partnership of equals envied by everyone who knew us. My business continued to grow, far beyond my initial dreams. A new chapter blossomed into a nationally renowned brand. I opened dozens of chain stores across the country, and as demand skyrocketed, I built my own factory, ensuring quality and control from design to production. By the late 80s, I had become a true powerhouse in the business world, a self-made woman whose name was synonymous with innovation and success. A few years into our marriage, I became pregnant. Alex, the fearless battalion commander, was suddenly reduced to a bundle of nerves, acting like an overprotective child, wanting to tuck me safely into his pocket and never let me out. He even applied for and was granted an extended leave from the army, something almost unheard of, just to stay home and take care of me, reading parenting books aloud with a comically serious expression. After 10 long months, I gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby girl. Alex held that tiny, soft bundle in his arms, his large, calloused hands impossibly gentle. This iron-blooded soldier who had stood unflinching on the battlefield, who had faced down kidnappers and knife wounds, actually had tears shimmering in his eyes. He named her an Peace, saying that I was his one and only lifelong peace, his everlasting solace. I held him close as we gazed at our sleeping daughter, her tiny fingers curled around his, and my heart overflowed with a happiness and peace I had never known was possible. This was the life I had been meant to live. Years flowed by like a gentle river. Our daughter and grew into a graceful, intelligent young woman. She inherited my head for business and Alex's quiet strength and moral compass, becoming the admired top student of her school. By the time she was a teenager, my clothing empire had gone global, with stores in Paris and New York. I had long since stepped back from day-to-day management, entrusting the operations to the capable team I had built, freeing up my time for my family. Alex had risen to the rank of division commander, his responsibilities immense. Yet no matter how heavy his duties, whenever he had time, he devoted it all to me and in. He would clumsily massage my shoulders after a long day or sit with me in comfortable silence on the porch, his hand finding mine. We never spoke of earth-shattering vows or dramatic declarations. Our love was woven quietly into the fabric of our daily life, as gentle, steady, and life-sustaining as flowing water. On my 40th birthday, Alex managed to secure a few days of leave. He personally cooked a full table of all my favorite dishes, the kitchen a hilarious disaster zone by the time he was finished. After dinner, with an giggling conspiratorially beside him, he brought out a small velvet box. Opening it, I saw a beautifully crafted diamond ring glittering in the soft light. Then, to my utter astonishment, Alex dropped to one knee, looking up at me with eyes full of the same sincerity and deep affection I had fallen in love with years ago. "Lien," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Years ago times were hard and I could only give you a simple wedding. I've never felt I did enough. Now I want to ask you again. Will you marry me once more?" I looked at him, at the starlight of our shared years shimmering in his gaze, and then at our daughter, now taller than me, laughing and cheering us on. Laughter of pure, unadulterated joy spilled from my lips, but before I knew it, happy tears were streaming down my face. I reached out my hand and let him slip the ring onto my finger, next to my original, simpler wedding band. "I will, Alex," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "I will. Whether in the past or now, I will always be willing." All the shadows of yesterday had long been dispelled, not by vengeance, but by his deep, steadfast, and unwavering love. He was my peace, my partner, my second chance. Outside, the sunlight shone warmly, the breeze was gentle, and in my heart, there was nothing left but a clear, open, and brilliantly lit path ahead, stretching out into a future I had built with my own two hands, and would walk hand in hand with the man I loved. My new chapter was still being written, and every word was a gift. The end.